Welcome to As Long as the River Flows, a Keepers of the Water podcast. Episode 16 is part one of a three-part series on Bigfoot. Join Keepers of the Water as we explore the mysteries of the land, water, and spiritual beings with esteemed knowledge holders Isaac Murdoch and Dr. Kevin Lewis. In episode 16, we hear traditional knowledge keeper Isaac Murdoch speak about Bigfoot, or Babamamuk, a term used in the Anishinaabeg language. Isaac is from the Fish Clan and is from Serpent River First Nation. Isaac grew up in the traditional setting of hunting, fishing, and trapping. Many of these years were spent learning from elders in the northern regions of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Isaac is well respected as a storyteller and traditional knowledge holder. He has committed his life to the preservation of Anishinaabe cultural practices and has spent years learning directly from elders.
Well, hello, everybody. Bonjour. Manzinapkinegego'anaabe Bombgiizhik. Anishinaabeg and Donjaba. Canoe and do them. Anishinaabe nini and dao. Nimkiajbekong ninda and kitchen and dum. Yayama piwi ganon and gok. Atukanan. Babamamuk. My name is Isaac Murdoch. My traditional name is the man who paints the rocks. I was given the honorary name Bombgiizhik from the elders in my family, which means revolving sky. I'm from the Fish Clan. I come from a beautiful place in the Great Lakes area, and I currently live at Nimkiajbekong, which means Thunder Mountain. And I'm very happy to be able to be here to tell you, to talk about Babamamuk, to talk about the Bigfoot. I remember hearing about Bigfoot, ever since I was small. And so it was something that was always, very real in our culture, in our mind, in our spirit. And when the elders spoke about Bigfoot, they always talked about how magical it was. And so I was always fascinated by these magical things that live in the forest. And in my language, we have two words for them. We have Babamamuk. Babamamuk, it means like the ones that are traveling around, but not just traveling around. Babamamuk, it means like it's almost like they're sailing through the air almost, in a way. They're spirits. And so that's one way that we understand them. Another word that we have is Sabe, which literally means really big person. Sabe. And of course, Sabe and Niniwak, the great big ones. And so those are the two words that we know them as. But sometimes in the language, when you're describing things, other words will come out too, because it's a very descriptive language. So sometimes other words will come out when they're describing the Babamamuk. I remember the very first experience that I had was hearing that they're the protectors, the guardians of our forest. And I remember hearing that from my father, who was one of the best bush people I know. And he used to tell me that when I was a child. Early in the morning, we'd get up, we'd be somewhere in the bush, and the sun would be coming up, and we'd have the sunrise ceremonies, and the sun would be coming up, and they'd have different things, and they'd make different offerings into the fire. And one of them was always to this Babamamuk nation, these great beings. They often said that they're the guardians of our forest, and that they require, just like everything in nature, Biganjigawan, they require offerings for the work that they do. The same way that we give offerings to the spiritual beings that we pray to all the time. Because they do that work, they need offerings too. And so the offerings that were often given to Sabe was meat, just like what Kevin was saying. They would take a nice fish or a nice piece of liver, a nice piece of meat, and maybe some, we used to call it hogweed. Cocoa shwashk. They'd add some of that in there, and they'd offer that. They'd bundle that up, and they'd put that in the fire. They always said that Babamamuk, it lives in this world, but it also lives in a very spiritual world that we can't always see. It lives in both. It exists in both. And that they can shapeshift. They can become invisible and then visible again. And you can hear them in the forest. You can hear them. I've heard them. So that's my earliest memories of them was them making offerings and putting them in the fire because maybe somebody heard one, or maybe somebody had seen one in the area. So all of a sudden we're making offerings because we have to make a payment to them. We have to make that payment because for the work that they do for the earth. We consider them like one of Earth's helpers. And so for that good work that they do, we have to pay them. Bigidnege, sema, meanwhile, we have to give them the meat and the tobacco and all those things. That's important to give them because we have to live with them. I was 10 years old, maybe a little bit older than 10, when I was taken out onto the land. And there is a very special place, and that place was Cho'okananing, and it means the place of the big bones. And it's not a place that you'd go visit, but it's a place that you have to pass through, you have to go around, and there's a very sacred waterfall there. And that waterfall is a very, very special sacred place. Miskashkinajiguan is what they call that place. And it's a very sacred place. And that's where the bones are. They have a graveyard there where those Babamamok live. For this TV thing here, I'll just call them Babamamok because that's how I grew up knowing them. But the Babamamok, they had their own graveyard there. And I remember when we were traveling by, they said, don't look and be very careful, watch your step, and don't step over any bones. If you step over a bone, you'd get sick and you would die. That's what they told me. And so when we're going through, as you're walking through it, you can see things hanging in the trees. You can see things hanging there. They were making their own offerings and stuff like that and hanging them in the trees. You know how, they decorate bones of animals and things like that, and we're hanging them up in the trees. There was even a little one, a little grave, maybe about 4 feet. I seen that. I was told at that time that little one, it had seen a Jaganash, meaning a British person, I guess. It seen it. It got so scared that it died, and it was buried there. And so that's what I was told. And so they die too, is what I understand. They live in a spiritual world too. So you know how like us, we live in our world, but them, they have this extra layer, or this extra place that they go to as well. And they too can travel, in the rocks. They can travel inside the rocks through places like Doshkopkok, where the rocks open up and they go inside there and they live in there. There's families that live in there, and they live inside there. I'll tell you a story that I heard. This happened way, way before my time. And this story came from my grandfather. And my dad too talked about this. What they said was, years and years ago, there was a battle with the Nodoak, the Mohawk people, I guess. And at that time, we were at war with each other for various reasons. A lot of people say they call it the Beaver Wars. We don't call it the Beaver Wars. We weren't fighting over beaver. That's ridiculous. History has it all wrong. We weren't fighting for beaver. That's so silly. Our people respected things, but yet at the same time we're at war. And there was a warrior that got wounded. He got wounded real bad, and they took him to the water. Whenever people got wounded, they always took them to the side of the lake or the river or something like that. All of a sudden, his friend was trying to help doctor him, trying to get him well again, and started to pray and knew that his friend was going to die. And there he was in this bay. And I don't know where I have an idea of where that bay is, but I don't exactly know where it is. But I can kind of picture it in my mind. And there's these high rocks that go around, these high rocks that go around this bay. This man, knew that his friend was possibly going to die. So he tried to fix him up as best as he could. But then he thought that he would pray and he'd leave it up to the spirits of the land and waters to cure him. So he went up on top of these rocks on top there, and he started to pray. And Wibkopkok is what they call that place. And he went up there to pray up there. And he's sitting there praying real hard, fasting. He covered his face with black coals to turn him into like a ghost. He covered his face with black coals. It was all black. He's praying for his friend. When all of a sudden, he could hear splashing in the water. Sloosh, sloosh, sloosh. It sounded almost like a moose, but not. All of a sudden, he looked, and he seen that great big being. Very big. Hairy, tall, big. And all of a sudden, it reached down into the water, and it started to rub its hands back together like this in the water. And all of a sudden, it pulled out a great big kundamo. A kundamo is a yellow water lily root. That's a kundamo. And he took out that great big kundamo, and he went onto the rocks, and he started to smash it onto the rocks, and he started to bust it up. And as it was busting up, he started to blow on it like this. And he was so powerful, he was starting to dry that out. And then he grabbed this stone, and he started to grind it and make a powder out of it, and he kept blowing on it. Where that rock is, where he was grinding, he made a botagan. I don't know how to explain it, but there is a groove inside the rock where you grind things. He made that right there. That's how strong he was. And he kept blowing on it. His sacred breath was being put inside that kundamo, inside that medicine. It was being put inside there. The sacred breath. They pray too. So their prayer comes from their heart, comes out of their breath, and went inside of that kundamo, loading that kundamo with more medicine already. And he kept breathing on that kundamo. And he kept grinding it and grinding it and grinding it. And finally he grabbed that kundamo and he rubbed it in his hand like this. He could just see it falling down. And then he grabbed that man by the leg, and he grabbed a handful of that dried up kundamo. Kundamo squat. It was all grounded up. And he grabbed that man by the leg, and he walked right into that rock, right into that mountain. He walked right in there, that opened up, and he walked right in there with that man. He drug him with one leg only, drug him in there. And once he got in there, his wounds were on his side over here and on his leg. And he grabbed that kundamo, and he blew it on that man on his side and on his leg, because he was bleeding to death. And it stopped the bleeding right away. It stopped it. The man that was wounded, the one that was getting doctored inside there, inside that cave, he looked around. And when he looked inside that cave, he seen many things in there. There was lots of, I guess, medicine bags made out of animals. They were all hanging up there. And there's lots of plants hanging up and shrubs and all that. He was a master at knowing the medicines of the underworld, knowing the plants and all of that of the earth. And he did that again. He blew that kundamo on his wounds. And he put his hands on there. His great big hands, they're big. And he prayed. And when he started to pray, more of them came. More of those babamamo came. And next thing you know, they came right out of the walls, and they started to all pray for this man. And the guy that was fasting on top, when they were praying, the mountain was shaking. And he could feel the power, and he can hear everything. There was a crack just over on this side here. He could hear the songs coming out of that crack. He can even smell the breath come out of that crack. The Babamamok were all coming together in ceremony to cure this man using that kundamo. And they cured him. And finally he grabbed him by his leg. and drug him out of that cave. Mimiwashing is what it's called. He dragged him right out of there and left him on there on a where that Botaganing, where that grinded stone was, where he made, and he left him there. And so finally his friend, he got enough sense that was fasting to know that his friend was doctored because he seen him being drug out. And so he went down there. And sure enough, that Kandamo stopped all that bleeding and was healing him. And even then he can smell the breath coming off of that Kandamo, that medicine that was inside there. And of course he grabbed his friend. They stayed there for I don't know how many days until his friend was 100%, and they left. But after that, whenever they go by that place by canoe, or when any of us go by there where that rock is carved in, we always leave an offering there now. We always leave something there. All the time we leave fish there, meat, things like that. We leave it there. And years later, people were going by there, and they would leave their traps or their guns or their fishing nets. Maybe overnight they'd leave it at that Botaganing where that bowl was. They'd lean it up on there in hopes that it would bless their guns. Because sometimes when we're gossiping or saying bad things about other people, they'll get tangled into our snare wires. They'll get tangled into our traps or they'll start to plug up the hole in our guns. They'll start to get tangled up into our fish nets. So the gossiping and the lying and all that will get tangled up in there. And next thing you know, those things are already full and you can't catch nothing. Your gun won't shoot straight. And so you take it to a holy place, to a sacred place like that. Jita King, we call it. And you leave them there in hopes that maybe one of the Babamamok will touch them or wash it with their hands and make them pure. Or say if there's maybe somebody wasn't supposed to touch something, they touched it by accident or they stepped over it, like that, then you take it to a place at Botaganing and it would be cleansed like that. But anyway, some people were going by there one time, and they seen that maybe 4 or 5 of them, Babamamok, they were eating the kandamo. They were chewing on it and eating it, laughing and having fun. And they didn't know they were being watched, but they were digging up the kandamo. And so, but the people paddled around a long way around. They left them alone and so that they didn't want to invade their privacy. But they say that when you see that kandamo floating up like that, we don't bother it because we're not the ones that dug it up. We're not the ones that did the hard work to clean it and all that. Maybe that belongs to them or something else. So we believe that if we bother those things, if we take that kandamo, maybe it'll make us sick. It can even kill us, so we don't bother those things. If they're already floating on the ground, on the water like that, we don't bother them because those are not ours. We're not the ones that dug them up. We're not the ones that gave offerings for them. Mama pigwa minwa. Anyway, so we don't bother that because it could be theirs. And this is what I heard. These are the stories that my uncles and my grandparents and things like that used to tell me about these things. And they really believed them. Like, these are not myths or legends. These are, in our way, we believe that there's many helpers here on this earth. There's the Anishinaabeg, the mermaids. You have the Chiginabegok, the serpents. The Nimki-Benesiwak, the thunderbirds. You have Bagak, you have this very spiritual skeleton being. You have, of course, Pahisak, which is like a little person. You have the Memegwesiwak, which is like another type of little people. You have the Bagujininiwak, which is like another type of little people. You have the Bagawagamik, which is like a mermaid, half beaver, half human. You have, the great Nanabojo and his brothers, Majakawas, Chapayabus, Pakwas, all these great spiritual beings that live in the forest, Wasakichak that live in the forest. And, you also have the Metigog, the Wesiwag, the Gigawag, Binnesiwag, the trees and the animals and the birds and the fish, all these things. And so we believe that they're the leaders of our government. They're the government. And that as Anishinaabeg people, the animals, the Wesiwag, are the ones that teach us about that government. And so when people talk about when they talk about our great laws and those things, that's what they're talking about, is all of those things that govern the earth's helpers that govern the land. And that's how I know it to be. And so we hold these beings in great reverence because they do a lot of work. But just like everything else, if you want your things to be strong, you have to feast them. You have to feast them. You have to give them. You have to make your payments. We have to make our payment here on this earth all the time to all these beautiful spirits that give us this life and give us this beautiful land to live on. But right now, the two-legged are on a quest to destroy the earth. Babama Mok, Nagani Wagwiji, Magadawamat, Eju Bakmazwe. Those big beings are trying to protect this sacred earth right now. Nangwa, Mompi, and Anishinaabe King. They're trying to protect everything right now. But the elders always say they need to have given nourishment, prayers, and tobacco, and things that they like to eat so that they can be strong in the work that they do. So if we want to protect our forests, then we make the offerings to all the little people. We make them to the big people. That's a spiritual thing. There's more power in those spiritual beings than all of the internets and the computers and all of that combined. So I was always told, don't forget to make your offerings to them because they're going to help us. They're going to help save these lands. If they're not respected, and if they're taken advantage of by being ignored and not having offerings given to them, then they'll steal us. That happened just right over here. Not even far from where I am, maybe only 5 miles only. There was a young Anishinaabe Kwe, she was in her house. And you hear this lots all the time about, people getting stolen. But that young lady, she was stolen. And they chased that Babamamok all the way down to Cedarville or Giizhik. That's what they call that place, Giizhik. They chased that thing all the way down there. And it was decided that a sacred adoption had taken place and that she wasn't stolen, but she was adopted. And so once they got their wits together, they realized that this thing had adopted that child. And to teach that child the knowledge and the original instructions on how to live here so that we could learn them. We learned them. And they had her for she was in there in that cave for, I think, about maybe a year. But when she came out very old. Time wasn't the same. And she came back and she taught the people around Ba Ting about the medicines of the earth and how to live here correctly like that. And so for us around here, Babamamok is a very real, very sacred being that is very powerful and deserves the offerings, And so that's what my dad would always say. Oh, I'm going to go make an offering, and do bagudna say ma. I'm going to offer my tobacco or weas or whatever, even kandamo they'd offer, And so these are some of the stories. There's always lots of stories, but these are some of the things that I heard growing up. And that if we want to protect our lands and our waters, then we have to make these offerings to those beings. The water offerings, like the Zen Ba Matigo and Sak. We have to make those water offerings to the waters and the spirits that live in there. And also to the guardians of the land, the Babamamok, and the Memegwesiwak for our rocks. Those types of things. To the Nemki Benesiwak, that nests on top of the certain places. That's what's going to protect our life. That's what the old people used to say anyway.
That was Isaac Murdoch, and thank you for listening. If you would like to donate to the cause or find out more information on Keepers of the Water, visit keepersofthewater.ca. If you would like to hear the complete webinar, visit the Keepers of the Water Facebook page or the Keepers of the Water YouTube channel. Don't forget to download and subscribe to the podcast to be the first to hear new episodes. Miigwech.